Coming up on SBS World News, NATO members pledge long-term support for Ukraine, confirming Kyiv's future is with the alliance. The Israeli military urges all Palestinian civilians to leave Gaza City in a move condemned by the United Nations. And more US Democrats publicly call for Joe Biden to bow out of this year's presidential race. Good evening. With the spotlight still firmly on Ukraine on day 2 of the NATO summit, leaders have declared the embattled nation is on an irreversible path to membership. More than $60 billion worth of aid in the next year, including the delivery of F-16 fighter jets, among the pledges made in Washington.
Rolling up to the White House, a grand welcome for NATO leaders. Dinner rounding out a day of high-level working sessions and bilateral meetings. The summit is marking 75 years of history.
To NATO and to our neighbourhood of nations, may we continue to grow stronger and closer in all the years ahead.
Away from the celebrations is the reality of responsibility. With a war still being fought in Europe, it's no surprise Ukraine was at the heart of today's declaration. Leaders writing, Russia remains the most significant and direct threat to allies' security.
In a sense, as a message to Putin, the resolve of NATO, bigger now than it's ever been, more united than it's ever been, and absolutely clear-eyed about the threat of Russian aggression.
NATO saying Russia's war machine is fuelled by Iran, North Korea and China.
China has become a decisive enabler of Russia's war against Ukraine. And China's support increases the threat Russia poses to Euro-Atlantic security.
While there's still no timeline attached to Ukraine's NATO accession,
Ukraine's path and bridge towards NATO membership is now irreversible.
As Ukraine moves irreversibly along the path to membership.
The rhetoric offers a pointed message to the Kremlin.
As Ukraine continues its vital reforms, we will continue to support them on their irreversible path to NATO membership.
That support pledged in multiple forms. More than $60 billion worth.
The transfer of F-16 jets is underway, coming from Denmark, coming from the Netherlands, and those jets will be flying in the skies of Ukraine this summer to make sure that Ukraine can continue to effectively defend itself against the Russian aggression.
Broader defence and deterrence was of course discussed too.
We have deployed combat-ready forces on NATO's eastern flank, put in place the most comprehensive defence plan since the Cold War, and we now have over 500,000 forces at high readiness in the alliance. Today, we decided to adapt NATO's command structure, improve our integrated air and missile defence systems.
The NATO Secretary-General announcing 23 members now meet the target of spending at least 2% of GDP on defence, up from 3% a decade ago.
We can and will defend every inch of NATO territory, and we'll do it together.
The summit continues overnight with a meeting of the NATO-Ukraine Council. Tanya Dandrinos, SBS World News.
The Israeli military has urged all Palestinian civilians to leave Gaza City and move south as it stepped up a military offensive there. The United Nations quickly condemned the evacuation order, describing it as appalling and concerning. The move comes as international mediators from Egypt, Qatar, the US and Jordan continued their attempts to negotiate a ceasefire deal between Hamas and Israel.
A second day of airstrikes in central Gaza and the death toll continuing to mount. 9 months into this war, and for the second time, people here faced with the prospect of trying to relocate to another designated safe zone. Israel categorical about who they are targeting.
We want to get civilians out of harm's way. We have no interest in harming civilians in Gaza City or anywhere else. We're trying to get to the terrorists, where the terrorists attack from or where they have set up base.
As the Israeli military continues its ground and air offensive into the center of the city, searching for Hamas targets, residents unable or unwilling to move.
وإيش دخلني أنا بني آدم في جثث بني آدمين مدنيين، إيش دخل المدني؟ أنت بتقاتل في الشعب ولا بتقاتل أنت في مين؟ أنت قاعد بتحرق الأخضر واليابس.
The conflict seemingly interminable, leading the United States to send its National Security Council coordinator for the Middle East to meet the Israeli Prime Minister. Benjamin Netanyahu insisting the war must continue until Israel has destroyed Hamas. Elsewhere in the region, the Qatari capital Doha playing host to intelligence chiefs from the US, Egypt, Qatar and Israel in the latest efforts to negotiate a ceasefire and a hostage handover. And in Cairo, the foreign ministers of Egypt and Jordan announced the talks were underway with Lebanon and Israel to avoid what they called all-encompassing confrontations. News of the mediations acknowledged with some interest by Hezbollah.
إذا صار وقف إطلاق نار جبهتنا ستوقف إطلاق النار بلا نقاش بمعزل عن أي اتفاق أو آليات أو مفاوضات أو أي شيء.
No let-up though for Gaza, the United Nations and the Israeli military blaming each other for the lack of aid entering the Strip.
We are 9 months, almost 9 months from the beginning of the war. 26 trucks. This is all what they brought. And still, the bottleneck line is, despite all adjustments that we are making, is that the UN are not doing their job.
We're running an opportunistic aid operation where we see a window, we are grabbing it, and we're grabbing that aid. The point is that Gaza continues to be a war zone, right? On top of that, you have the lawlessness. So we're doing what we can.
With Gaza City designated a dangerous combat zone by the Israeli military, another exodus has begun of an already displaced people. Edmund Roy, SBS World News.
The number of